Paul and Patty knew this. No matter where they go or what they do, they always try to remember what to do if the atom bomb explodes right then. It's a bomb. Duck and cover. Duck and cover.
Mad Squirrel.
Are you ready for his return? Amen.
Duck and cover.
Flying saucers? Our minds should be open on all subjects.
Great principles do not live from generation to generation without being nurtured, without being kept vigorously alive. Unless we understand and work effectively for the principles upon which our American way of life is founded, the structure will crumble and our heritage of freedom will perish.
Our minds should be open on all subjects.
Mad Squirrel.
Duck and cover. Atta boy, Tony. That flash means act fast. Duck and cover.
Do you know that every day someone loses a sale or creates a misunderstanding just because he does not speak intelligibly? You must be heard. You must be understood. You must be pleasing.
Duck and cover.
Hello, and welcome to an interview with our friend here, Hail Sagan 77. This evening we're going to be discussing cultural differences with paranormal beliefs, and I thought it would be an interesting topic primarily because, well, you know, Sagan here actually holds very different beliefs in comparison to how I grew up. Now, he grew up in a different type of household. I grew up in a different type of household. There's different cultural factors that go into how, you know, our beliefs that we carry day to day. Now, this may sound like a very average topic, but in actuality, it goes a little deeper than that. Because we all carry different beliefs, whether that's religious beliefs, what we believe as far as superstitions, what things we were told as kids that were just, you know, well, this is the way it is. But in all actuality, they were more urban legends or, you know, superstitions, lack of better words. So I wanted to thank Carl, Mr. Sagan, for coming on tonight. How are you doing?
I am good. Thank you for having me. This is actually, to be honest, this is a topic up my alley. I really appreciate you inviting me to this.
Good. I'm really glad you could come on. So tell me a little bit, without obviously like doxing yourself, but what XOs and XOs. Tell me about how you grew up. Like, what was your background? You know, what kind of culture did you grow up in?
Well, I grew up in a Hispanic household. First of all, I'll just say that. So, for anyone interested, what is he? I am actually of Hispanic background here, and I did grow up with grandparents that were 100%. They were Hispanic. They themselves obviously grew up entrenched in in superstitions, that came from Mexico, that came actually also from like Aztec and indigenous beliefs as well. And you get that combination there, and it can be pretty freaky, pretty scary, but very interesting to say the least. So that kind of passed on. I mean, I grew up primarily with my grandparents for most of my childhood, so I got to, we myself and my sisters were all really exposed to that. Of course, it's once I grew up a little bit and learned, okay, well, a lot of this stuff, yeah, it's a little bit weird, and maybe there's definitely something outside of the box that we can kind of study and realize where these came from, and it kind of shed a lot of light. But yeah, that's primarily the way that I grew up.
Now, without there's different types of Hispanic communities. So you're going to have, the Mexican culture, you're going to have Cuban, Hispanics. You're going to have Puerto Rican. You're going to have Dominican. And each type is a different form. You know what I mean? Thanks, Spaniards. But
So true.
but you actually come from the Mexican culture, so that's a whole
True.
nother. That does change the dynamic of what you were taught as a kid, or better yet, what superstitions that were believed in. Because not just because of the influences of Catholicism. If that was was that more prevalent in your household? Was Catholicism?
It was, yes, very, very Catholic. My grandparents, they were heavy churchgoers, and you know, so there were a lot of the beliefs and a lot of the superstitions did mainly come, from that culture, to be honest. And you're absolutely right. I'm glad you mentioned, that there are different cultures within the Latin community, so you're going to have different superstitions. Yeah, mine was prevalently in a Mexican culture, even though a lot of them are very similar, and a lot of stories, a lot of lore is very, very similar. A lot of superstitions. You're right. Mexicans can be a little bit more specific. So, but yeah, the Catholic element is absolutely what influenced that mostly. And if obviously you are pretty studied in most religions, I know that, Matt, and you know how scary a lot of the beliefs are in the Catholic Church.
Oh my God, yes.
The guilt, the fear mongering, really, for the most part. Basically, it's like how many ways can you go to hell? They will remind you of that, and that was in our house. So.
Oh, I bet. And this is Mexican Catholic, and that's very different
correct.
than Roman Catholic or Irish Catholic. I mean, they all have the similar guilt, don't get me wrong. They're equal opportunity guilters. But there's different types of beliefs, even because of the cultural differences. I mean, just like the Day of the Dead celebration, for years the Catholic Church was like, no, that's paganism.
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden they're like, well, if we want to keep the Mexicans in Catholicism, we should probably allow it.
Yep.
So you see those cultural assimilation type things that the Catholic Church had no choice but to do to keep, certain populations basically involved.
So true.
We had talked about this because I grew up, although my background is a little mixed itself, and mutt-like, I grew up more around white. I mean, I grew up in a city, so I was living in urban areas, going to urban schools, all that shit. But I grew up primarily as a low-income, low-middle-class white household. Okay? And white culture, as far as it goes to religion, it's like you just make your appearances at church. It depends where you live, of course. Like, meaning, if you're in the South, you're probably going to attend church a lot more than somebody who is a Northerner. Midwesterners might attend way more than somebody on the West Coast, because of different political beliefs. But there's definitely differences between, I would say, white culture and their belief systems versus the Hispanic community and their belief systems of how they react and interact with, whether it be superstitions or their faith in general. But what is something, as an example from your childhood, that stuck out later that you were like, well, this is something different. Now I understand that this isn't normal, or this is different.
Well, okay. You know what? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start with, with a very common, I want to call it folklore, because it's really what it is, and it's the story of La Llorona. This is something that was taught to us as kids. We were made to believe the way that I'm just going to go and put this out there. The way that probably most white cultures and families were raised to believe in Santa Claus is exactly how we were raised to believe in La Llorona. Among others, there's others as well, but that's another one that was put out there, and I begin to wonder, kind of
like Kukui, like the Kukui. I'm sorry.
Exactly. A Kukui is definitely another one. Although that one is just more playful, but it was used basically as a good way to scare the bejesus out of us kids and into behaving well. And La Llorona was probably a very similar thing. Now, as you know, there are tons of variations of the story of La Llorona, but
Mm-hmm.
essentially, for anyone out there listening that is not too familiar, I haven't seen the movie, but try not to think, and it's my understanding you don't want to, go by what that movie has to say. I'm just telling you that up front.
Mm-hmm.
But it's essentially about a woman who, can be found, the ghost of a woman that can be found near most ditches or bodies of water, especially along the Rio Grande. And she essentially is known as La Llorona, which means the crying woman. And the reason why she's weeping is because she's weeping for the children that she lost, that she actually killed in order to possibly impress a man that rejected her. And so that's the most common variation. There's all sorts of other ones as well,
Mm-hmm.
but that is one that in our household was just it's almost like, well, everyone just knew this to be true,
Mm-hmm.
and so you must fear it, you must be aware of it, you must be cautious, and and it was something that I think, obviously they grew up with. My grandparents grew up with.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, and of course, in my opinion, I believe all good stories come from somewhere. They actually come from something that, in fact, was true,
Yeah.
even if it's just a tidbit. I think but it's something right there as an example that, was essentially embedded in that culture, transferred over to us, and it stuck with me. And of course, I love that now. I understand why, it's kind of almost an important story,
Mm-hmm.
even though they didn't treat it like that. They wanted to tell us as more of a cautionary tale,
Mm-hmm.
but I understand, I guess how significant it is to that culture because it goes back to.
Well, it's
Um,
interesting. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you a
oh, no
little,
problem.
but with Alorona, okay, the her story is, like you just said, the perfect summary of that.
Hmm.
There are so many similarities within Mexico that mimic that same story, but in different scenarios. A lot of Mexican, monsters and spirits and things like that. And one of them is La Mala Hora, spelled
Hmm.
Lamala, and then Hora is Hora. And
Right.
same type of synopsis, very similar. It's more from the southernmost states of Mexico.
Hmm.
And that story is very similar. It's usually a beautiful woman dressed in white, except she really does target men based on her beauty, and she's more of a seductress, and she kind of goes after women,
Right.
or excuse me, men, and usually they end up being found floating in a lake or dead on the side somewhere in the woods. And
Right.
it's there's quite a few, and it actually, because the Mayan language was very prevalent in those areas of the southern regions of Mexico.
Right.
So there's translation issues, there's all types of things that came out of that. But it's a very similar story, except the difference is La Llorona, that's more in the Rio Grande. So the entire
True.
damn river has the plague of this woman and the story of this woman. You know what I
Right.
mean? And
Yep.
that shows up throughout the Southwest, the American Southwest, all the way into Mexico. But then you start to see these more similar stories, but different. Like once again, like you were saying, forewarnings.
Correct.
They're always about, well, don't trust, women. Ooh, ooh, spooky wench, that kind of thing.
Right. And you know what's really funny? I mean, now that you bring that up, like, for La Llorona, like for kids, the basically the lesson there is, don't wander. Don't you listen to your parents. Don't wander. Don't do. Don't just get yourself into trouble because trouble will find you.
Mm-hmm.
And but for adults, it's more on the moralistic side, like, well, this is what can happen to you if you cheat on your lover, or if like you invite it if you do
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So it's funny because you have a different degree of what the lesson is in these stories,
Mm-hmm.
and I find that interesting. There's another one actually that I always forget to mention because it's not one that I grew up with, but I know a lot of other Mexican families do. It's about La Planchada. I don't know if you've heard of this one,
Uh,
but
and yeah, go ahead. Tell the story.
yeah, absolutely. And this is actually essentially about a nurse that has been found like in hospitals in
Mm-hmm.
Mexico, especially in Mexico City, that will appear, to patients who are really, really suffering. And they, of course, it's been reported that either she will just come in looking like a regular nurse. They call her La Planchada because she just her uniform is so well ironed,
Mm-hmm. Like
and
kind
so
of like
neat.
Angel of Mercy or an Angel of Death.
There you go, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but I mean, she doesn't appear obvious,
Right.
to these patients. They're suffering. She comes in and she heals them. And the stories are that these patients will, all of a sudden have a huge turn in their health, and they will go from, on the brink of death to suddenly just feeling, real, healed and are sent to recover. And when they're asked, well, how did this happen, or why do you feel better? And they'll say, well, this nurse came to me last night, or came to me and healed me.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are tons of reports like that, which is actually more on the positive side, right? Not scary.
Right. Mm-hmm.
More of a great, it's a great story. Now, as to how how this nurse actually was created to begin with, like how she died, or why she is visiting these hospitals to begin with. That varies, of course, from from one province to another, from one state to another in Mexico. But that's another one that, like,
And
uh,
how do you pronounce how do you spell La Planchada?
planchada. It is Planchada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember the story, and only in passing. Um, they call her the Iron Lady, but
Yes.
I couldn't remember how to spell it. But it is actually based on a real person, believe it or not, and her actual name, it's I can't even pronounce her name properly, but she worked in Juarez Hospital in Mexico in the 1930s.
Okay.
Her uniform was always clean and crisp and perfectly ironed, and she was very good at her job, and her patients felt lucky to be under her care. But things started to change when she started getting involved with a handsome doctor that joined the hospital staff. Her first name was pronounced Eulalia.
Okay. Eulalia.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like okay.
And so the doctor and her started to see one another. They fell in love. She got engaged. But soon after they got the engagement, he left to attend a seminar. But to her shock and surprise, he did not return after the seminar. And after a week passed, still no sign of him returning. She became increasingly worried and felt something bad must have happened. Several weeks later, the hospital received word from the doctor. It seemed that he had met another woman that hosted the seminar, and the two had married. So she got very depressed. Then she became very ill.
Okay.
But primarily during her depression, she started to neglect her patients, and as a result, one of her patients died. So then she started to become ill herself. A lot of depression, and she died shortly after in the very hospital that she worked in. So she is still prevalent, as far as being seen at most hospitals in Mexico, especially in the Juarez area.
Interesting. Yeah, and I've heard a variation of that, and that she has been spotted in like in Mexico City, as far as down
Mm-hmm.
as Mexico City. So that is interesting. Because on the map they're really far apart.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, you know, and you wonder if it is actually part of the same, I guess, beginning that it carried down into Mexico City, or if they in fact did have their own, version
Mm-hmm.
of this angel, so to speak. So that's very interesting, though, and I have heard that variation that you're telling me about. That it was essentially that somehow, it had to. There was a relationship with a doctor that was involved there from the beginning, and that something, of course, went bad. And so that's thank you for that,
No
because I didn't
problem.
know about the
I'm
one up there.
actually showing a photo of her, the actual gal. They actually have a photo of what they allege to be her from the 1930s of that particular nurse. Um,
Awesome.
but this is also, it could be just a variation from stock photo, but I'm assuming this is very close to what the nurses looked in that hospital, and they're claiming that that is similar to what she would have been wearing at the time. So it's just a photo from the black and white photo from the 1930s, roughly. But yeah, I mean, it's that's why I always look at the basis of folklore, right? Like, where does this come from? And like you said, there's always a source for that information. You know,
Correct.
it doesn't just happen to be there. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, just like all great stories, right? Um, so it's always you're like you said, it's fun to find out like, well, where did this start? Where at least where did it begin for one region versus another? It's always cool to kind of go into that.
Yeah.
It could be a little bit different.
Well, especially with like El Cucuy, like that one, you know. And honestly, like that one, I mean, in white culture, okay, we called it the boogeyman. And
Boogeyman,
that
that's right.
really is what it is. It's just the boogeyman.
Hmm.
So when I'm showing a photo of the El Cucuy, according to legend, and it's just a variation of different things, you know, it can have long fingers, it can look like a demon, or it can just be shapeless, but it's a monster. Most of the time it's a tangible type of monster, is the way that they depict El Cucuy, you know.
Right.
And
You know what's
I'm sorry,
really
go ahead.
funny, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off,
go ahead.
but one thing, Matt, that is so funny about like growing up with a kukui, we were never told what kukui looked like.
You're like,
Never.
you're screwed.
And that's when you knew the grandparents and the parents won. If they could convince you of something invisible, not even describe it, but just convince you that this is a scary thing that you do not want to face ever in your life, then you know they've won.
Right.
But never once did they actually describe him. They just said, he will appear, when you misbehave. He will appear when you least expect it, and he will scare you to death. That was enough. That was enough for us as kids. So I have looked at all of the images of what the kukui is supposed to look like and all the descriptions, and I'm like, well, you know what? For some reason, it's less terrifying than I remember as a kid.
Right.
And that's when my grandparents won. I'm just saying.
Well, exactly. You know, and the boogeyman when I was a kid, that was just generically the same thing. Everyone's told about, oh, you better stay in bed or the boogeyman will get you, that kind of crap. And you just kind of go, okay, and you never want to question it. You're just like, well,
Right. Oh, yeah.
what if, I misunderstood something,
Yep, and
yeah.
and nothing like a kid's imagination to run with it, right? Because that's what we do as kids is, oh, we're gonna think of the worst thing that we can imagine as a kid, and not mess with that, not fuck with that one bit. So yeah, I think that's why it's so effective on kids. It's like, hey, we'll let our imagination run wild on that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
On,
And, I think, when I was a kid, like, we didn't really, aside from the boogeyman, which is usually the big one, it's easy. Just be honest, it's the easy one,
right.
Because at Lorona, like, that one, I mean, when I looked at the story, I was like, holy shit, like, this weeping woman, that's the other nickname for her, right?
Correct.
Just the fact you'd see this woman, and of course, by nature, your immediate response is to feel bad. Because this woman is weeping, you're immediately going to tend to her or want to assist, not knowing that this is something a little bit more sinister, lack of better words.
Right.
And, there's been still tons of accounts still coming out of Mexico. I'm actually about to show some alleged video or photographs, and some could be total fraud. Keep that in mind. I'm not dumb. But, they have video or different... I guess, photography of people that have seen this woman, the Lorona, or what they suspect to be her, walking down highways, walking down freeways. Everyone's had a story of, a woman in white, and that's not unusual. Like in Chicago, in Chicago, Illinois, near, Resurrection Cemetery. You have, the Wandering Woman in White. That's physically, a lot of people have seen her. Resurrection Mary is her nickname. And there's a lot of those variations of a woman in white, and I've talked to, people first-hand accounts of seeing this type of shit in different regions for different reasons, and it's not always clear as to, like, who it is or what they want or behavior. But, the story of El Llorona, though, or La Llorona, excuse me, that one doesn't go away. It just keeps,
Right.
it comes back. There's different variations. I mean, now we have the film, but, the film is going to be overly dramatized, just like any other film we've seen.
Absolutely. It will be Hollywoodized, and even though I've heard, some horror fanatics, at work telling me, "Hey, you got to watch this. This is, it's going to be worth it." I can't help but just hesitate because, I just feel like no matter what, it's not going to measure up. And maybe you can't go in expecting that either. Maybe you just got to take it for what it is.
As entertainment.
And entertainment, and walk away, and, not put much stock into it. But you're right. Like you said, I mean, it's still so prevalent that Hollywood now wants a part of that, right? They want to put that out there. So anyone who has never heard of it, well, they're going to hear about it now.
Right, exactly. Now, here's another thing I find this so interesting. We're kind of tying into your childhood too. When you were growing up, what was I guess, your grandparents, what would they warn you about as far as, aside from, like, the little legends and stuff, but, like, let's say religiously, demons, witches, that kind of thing. Was there ever any discussion with your grandparents or from your grandparents or other family members about the dangers of the devil through those things? Like, meaning they would always, start bringing up the witches. That's a big one that I've run across, but I wonder if it's something that you've heard when you were a kid, even in passing.
Well, I mean, it was really embedded in a lot of things. Whenever we would, just as simple as, don't lie to us, because the devil will work through you if you do that, or just talking about like imagery of the devil, or of witches, or anything that just appeared evil. Just looking at it, to them, they felt like you're inviting it, and so we had to be careful about little things that we would watch from time to time, maybe on TV. We sure as hell weren't going to watch The Exorcist on TV. That was no. I mean, that was unacceptable. They would have turned off the TV immediately. But it kind of made us think like we had to be careful about what we watched, what we thought about, because it was always an invitation to the devil. And it was never even talks about or talk about like inviting demons. It was always about the devil. It was always centralized on inviting the devil. So I think to them that's they grew up more with the fear of inviting the devil himself, and not necessarily an evil entity or an evil energy. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. It was always centered on the devil. Now, one thing I will bring up is kind of going on, on witchcraft a little bit, is always being careful about what about envy. And I know we've spoken about this before, but there's something called ojo, which of course is not a new concept to most cultures here. Now, of course, there's a European version of ojo. There's a Mexican version of ojo, and this means the evil eye. So this means, of course, that you are envious of someone, or you want to curse someone for simply having something or doing something that you wish you could do. Something as basic as that. And And they would, of course, my grandparents believed heavily that if you ever found yourself, in that position where you're feeling highly envious or you wish harm on someone because you want what they have or what they are doing or who they are, essentially that is a form of witchcraft, and you're inviting that. So so that was something that was was in like on a daily basis. It would come up somehow, even if it was just a story that they would tell us. And I'll tell you this. I mean, there was even a case where my older sister, she was she had to have been 9 or 10 years old. She had long hair, and there was a child, actually a child and her parent, I believe, her mom, that really loved it. Like, they actually complimented her on it, but they kind of it was a little bit more than that.
A little zealous, maybe.
A little bit more than zealous, absolutely. And she ended up actually within the next couple of days after encountering that, her hair started to fall out, and it was coming out in almost chunks, I want to say. Really scary. Of course, my sister was horrified. And so when they found this, of course, and my grandparents, they were positive they knew what it was. And they ended up praying, like they actually prayed rosaries in front of the many saints that were in our house to help ward it away, to make it stop. And within days after, it did stop. Now, do we really know what happened there? Do we know for sure that that was actually related to that? Of course we don't.
Now, I have a question. Did you,
Sure.
you and I have talked about this story before. Didn't your grandparents reach out to someone to help them rid of what they believed was basically the evil eye? So who did they reach out to in their community to kind of help them? Even though they had, obviously they learned these things from word of mouth, but there's also different spiritual in quotes, spiritual leaders and spiritual, kind of like counselors that they can go to for this type of stuff to combat it.
Well, and I'll be honest with you. I mean, not in this case here, I don't recall them actually reaching out to somebody, somebody else. I know that this is going to sound strange. It almost came to this. They actually reached out to a family friend that we did have, whose name was Juan, and that that's John, of course. And my grandparents had a belief that anyone with the name of John, Juan, or even Juanita were blessed automatically with a gift of healing. And they were they almost, it didn't quite happen, but they actually reached out to him to see if he would gargle some water that my sister would be able to drink to put a stop to it because of the healing properties of that water if he had gargled it. Does that make sense? That's bizarre, absolutely bizarre.
It's
As a kid and even more as an adult, absolutely bizarre. But it in this case specifically, it was they resorted to praying rosaries at every saint in the house. But is there something else that you've heard?
No, I just ask about it because I mean there's different variations of the evil eye. And every culture has spiritual leaders within the community that, they practition in that specifically against evil spirits, or what, like in the Haitian cultures and in Turkey, and because Turkey has their own evil eye stories. Every culture actually does. And it's
Correct.
all around the same synopsises. I mean, it might get more specific depending on the culture, but, and there's different things that pop off, just dependent on what type of scenario it is. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So it shows up in almost every culture, and that's in Arabic, cultures. You'll see it in texts even where they reference jealousy, the greater sins, basically, of humanity that manifest themselves. And, I ask about it only because even Russia, Russia definitely has beliefs, because I think it's interesting, because the one thing that connects a lot of the belief systems, not so much, being a Muslim has their versions of it, absolutely, but it's more cultural based, and it has, you can't say it's necessarily Catholic related, even though, yes, a lot of the countries that have the evil eye impact in there do come off as, oh, well, this is from this country or that country. It all kind of just stems from the cultures themselves, and back in the day of what was considered envious, what was considered, something as simple as hair, like, to be jealous over something that trivial isn't necessarily that trivial if you look at the basis of the culture, what is considered beautiful, and what are the sins of being that way in that particular culture. It's just an interesting thing, and you have to go on a case-by-case basis for those things. So, it is what it is. So going back to the evil eye thing, that particular, man, it just shows up in so many cultures. But I just wondered specifically about practitioners, because I know within certain communities, I had a friend of mine I used to work with, and she had some stuff going on with her health, and so she actually went to kind of like a holistic medicine woman, lack of better words, within the Mexican culture. And this particular woman was considered a witch in Mexico, and she moved into a safer area in the States, and she was doing fine. And it's something that, in a sense, you could say they're almost like shamans, because really, in Mexican culture, they're all natives,
Right.
So, either way, though, she also had issues with the evil eye thing. And, that thing that we often see regarding the evil eye, you see it a lot on jewelry. It's not unusual to see it in jewelry.
Right.
But you see, like, the little blue round, like kind of a beautiful dark blue with maybe a light blue and white, just like an eye, like a giant eye. And it's usually in
Exactly.
bracelets and things like that. And you do see it it's very prevalent in Mexico to see those. People will wear them on bracelets. They'll wear them in necklaces. They'll hang them in their homes over doors or windows to kind of just ward off those things. And that you see the same symbol, however, in Russia. You see it in Turkey. You see it all over the world. It's kind of like it's just kind of like a safekeeping thing to keep things out of your house, I guess, lack of better words.
Right. I did want to ask you though, how because the evil eye, of course, is known around the world, right? It's a belief around the world. So how is that, or what kind of belief system was in place, for you growing up? Was there something like the evil eye? I guess growing up in a white household, or knowing families in a white household, was there something similar to that, or was it just called a curse or envy? What was it exactly?
It was just called envy. Now,
Just envy?
yeah, in my opinion, I think that some Catholics do believe in the evil eye, and I know the Italians do, for sure. They believe in casting it, too, and it's usually for vengeful shit. It's not just shit you see from, like, Sophia and fucking Golden Girls, This is, like, real life. This is, like, real life stuff that they do believe in. My grandmother believed in it, and she was Irish, and because they have variation in that, too, and usually it was just, like, a curse. If you want to go more European as opposed to, like, let's say American, I'd say European belief systems regarding the evil eye, they really believed that you could cast that on others to some extent. And let me be honest with you, I partially believe it's all about intent. I don't necessarily think that, do I think that people can give you the evil eye and you can have some kind of curse? I don't personally believe that. But I think that there is evidences to say, based on the belief of the person who's been cursed, they can kind of like put themselves in a position.
Right.
It's kind of like
that makes sense.
it's more in their head, and they do feed into it to some extent. or the stress of it, or just being around, like the prevalency of it. Like, it's kind of like people who were possessed by the devil, you know, allegedly. I think that they're susceptible to it based on the fact of their belief systems that enable it and give it power.
Right. Right. You actually, yeah, you said exactly what I was going to say as well. Like you almost have to give it enough power for it to really affect you, right? Just like the devil, just like being possessed by the devil, you have to give it enough power. So I agree with you. I definitely believe that it's something real, but I don't believe it's something that just anybody can do. No one can just inflict that upon you without you inviting it to a point, to an extent.
Now the blue eye that you and I most likely, I am showing a picture on the screen right now of the blue evil eye. That's the Nazar evil eye, and it does, you know, it has a familiarity to it that a lot of people are like, hey, I've seen that before. You know, it's not
right.
unheard of. It's just, it comes out of Turkey originally.
Right.
But it kind of just takes off, you know, because it means the same thing. You know, it's over that particular, the Nazar or the evil eye, that particular symbol is over 5,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And it's found all throughout the religions in the world, and cultures as well. And it does go back to jealousy. And also evil spirits. That's the big one. But it's one of those, it can, to wear the evil eye also, you know, this little good luck charm is basically what it is to ward off negative things and to bring good luck to you, or protection. But it's like a talisman, lack of better words. And
right.
you often see that, you know, they'll put it on, you know, a hand, you know, like coming from India or Arabic, you know, what is it, Hamasa?
Right.
It's usually embedded in that, which is protected also. Double whammy, you know. But it's a very interesting folklore on it. But at the same time, yeah, we didn't have, I mean, not really. I think it was related to, you know, the Irish, the Italians, you know, the more of the immigrants that came here carried those beliefs as opposed to people who had been living in the country, you know, for a very long time, unless it was religiously connected. So that you know, that's the thing too. We didn't really have that, I guess. It was more related to, you know, my grandmother was Irish, so she believed in that. That was more
right.
superstition than it was religious necessarily, but of course they always tie superstitions in with religious beliefs, right?
Right, absolutely.
Now, when you know, like when example two is within the Mexican culture, people are a lot more willing, and Hispanics in general, let me add this, much more of a willingness to have an open discussion about paranormal, spiritual type discussions. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot more of an open door policy.
Oh yeah. What's really funny is you're absolutely right. And what's really funny is that when the discussion comes up, right? They will always make it sound like, okay, we're going to talk about this, but you have to be careful. Like it's like, okay, well, if we're going to get into this, just so you know, where you need to be careful about what you say, how you say it. It's a subject that they're always going to be open to, but it's going to come with maybe certain limitations to a point. But you're right; they are absolutely way more open to talking about these things than someone would in a white household, and that I can tell you from personal experience. Growing up, when I did have friends, I'd go over to a friend's house. It was just a very different dynamic. Conversations were different. When I was there, it just felt different. But without a doubt, Mexican households, I mean, probably other, Latin cultures as well, are going to be so much more open to talking about it, and sometimes sometimes emphatically, sometimes with excitement about sharing a story. So it's just very different, and I that's one thing that I loved about my childhood. Even if it wasn't just with my grandparents, we would have family coming over. Hey, this was back in the day when we had company,
right.
unannounced, right?
Right.
And we would open up. They would open up the conversation. The adults would be in the kitchen. They'd open up the conversation. They'd invite us, us kids in to listen in, and whether the stories were true or not. It was always a fun conversation where it headed, and they had no problem, sharing those things with us. So it's really, really cool. Where, I imagine with, with you and your household, it really wasn't a common thing, was it?
Hell no. Yeah. Honestly, a lot of it, and this is the difference between the two. My household was very much more indifferent. You know what I mean? Like, my grandparents were very Catholic, but it varied. Whereas my grandmother was more, she was an Irish Catholic, and so was more like lenient to some extent, where she was just like, whatever. My grandfather was much more dedicated Roman Catholic, and he only attended churches on Saturdays because that's the true Sabbath, right? So, right. There was two extremes there, but I wasn't really forced on me to have a religious belief, unlike in a Hispanic household where, like, everybody went to church. They didn't give a damn if you were a part of that household or not, and I got drugged to so many, like, midnight masses against my will. And I went. I was just like, okay, I'm being polite. I love, I'm not trying to be a jerk or anything, but if I'm attending a gathering and they're doing something special, you go. It's just, you're in their home.
Absolutely.
So I got drugged to a lot of shit, to be honest with you, where I was like, oh God, and, but I never had that in our household, not like that. And, to be honest with you, this is my impression. And the same goes for, like, in the black community. I've been able to have a lot of open discussions with everyone they're very open to those things as well. But I think that what the white culture has done, and this is my opinion, and I'm not trying to be going for the SJW bullshit at all, because I'm just speaking honestly. I like how things get so exploited, unfortunately, due to the climate we're in now, that you can't have an honest conversation without somebody going, well, you're siding with the left or you're siding with the right. No, this is
shitty time, right?
It really is.
You're right. It brings that's always brought into every conversation now, it seems like. Anyway, go ahead.
No, it's true. So, taking a step back, because that's what I do. I think in the way that the white culture in general, intellectuals, all of them, see faith or religion as more of a side gig just to ensure that they get the pass into the kingdom of heaven. They don't really take spirituality very seriously. They believe in self-help and barely believe in anything whatsoever. And if they do, it's purely just to ensure that, well, at least on my deathbed, I have some kind of, reassurances. Because I've heard many stories from chaplains and stuff about, the greatest atheists become the biggest believers on their deathbed, right? And right. I think that's why you see this uptick of atheist thinking. And it's so... That's fine. If someone wants to be an atheist, power to you. I'm not going to judge you for your atheism. But don't judge me for having belief.
Absolutely.
Okay? And just because someone believes in anything doesn't make them more or less intelligent than you. Okay? I'm very open-minded. So I am absolutely willing to listen to every story with a very open mind. Because I've always been interested in that, and I've seen a lot of shit. I ran ghost.
Right.
I've run ghost hunting groups. I've talked to a lot of people. I was very active in the metaphysical community. I've interacted in all the communities on some level, and I've made notes. And if I think something's bullshit, it's bullshit to me. But to somebody else, it could mean something. And once again, it's based on the believer. It's not so much on the third party that's standing by, right?
Right.
So the way that white culture has kind of gone after faith, lack of better words, is only dumb people believe in urban legends. Only dumb people believe in the paranormal, because there's easy explanations after all, right?
Right. And
you can't have any of that because it makes you look unintelligent. So it's almost like this Western civilization, how the natives are mentality.
It's so true.
The peasants and the king and the queen type mentality of pedestaling. And and it's fine if somebody wishes to be that way, but the same people who lecture us about privilege think with the same colonialist brain, right? Because here's the thing, man. I've seen a lot of shit. Myself, I've spoken to numerous groups of people, individuals who never want to go on the record. Have seen some shit and had experiences that they cannot logically explain, and that's bothered them their entire lives because they don't want to seem unintelligent, stupid, crazy, and it sucks. I think that's the plague that I've seen and dealt with on the white side, and as somebody who's been mistaken for not being white a good majority of the time. Technically, I'm not, but whatever. It doesn't matter. It's you hear a lot of shit come out of their mouth that's just very out of touch, and you're like, listen,
Right.
You need to understand culture. You need to understand society. Religion has a lot of negative things, but spirituality and religion are two different things. And when I've argued with people about this, and because they believe that it's completely tied to a government-controlled institution. God hasn't
Correct.
been in. And I'm being honest. God hasn't been in religion as long as humans have had a fucking mouth.
Amen to that.
So that's the differences I think that I see is that in white culture they don't believe. I mean, they have some superstitions like the better safe than sorry attitude, but they always downplay it and belittle it. Like, oh, you know how silly that is. And even putting up. I'm going to be honest with you. My grandfather was very religious, so he had statues. I don't know. Did your grandmother or grandfather have statues in the home, like the Virgin Mary or?
Tons. Like we had at least 2 in every room in that house. It wasn't a big house, but we had 2 in every room that I know of. And I can tell you, I mean, and they had their own space. It was almost like a shrine at every location that they had, right? It wasn't just a statue. You also had to have a rosary on top of the statue. You had to have at least 1 candle on the side. It was, you found them everywhere.
And I like that part, I think, the most. When I've been deep into Mexico, not just, I didn't take a cruise, motherfuckers, but, I certainly did. And I went in with friends that had family outside of Mexico City, and then I've been to other little, of course, some of the vacation locations because it is gorgeous on the ocean. However, I love when we'd walk into a home and you would see the altar set up, and they'd have all of the candles out, and there'd be basically goodies like cookies or fruit or special treats for their ancestors, and also to God, for prayer.
Right.
I love that. And I fell in love with the Day of the Dead thing a long time ago.
Right.
Absolutely loved it. I think it's a fantastic thing to be able to celebrate your ancestors.
The idea of an offering to the dead and or to God, oh man, it really is a great concept that we should not have lost.
Yeah.
And we really have. We really have nowadays. Even those that call themselves religious or spiritual don't even do that. I'm with you on that. I do love that aspect. I love that aspect of Day of the Dead and what it represents and what you're really celebrating there.
Now, did your grandparents ever did they celebrate that holiday in their home?
No. We did not celebrate Day of the Dead.
Now, you didn't. Did you go to the cemeteries?
Well, we would go on our own. But not during those times. What we would do though is we would actually celebrate Day of the Dead occasionally on a reservation. The Indian pueblos in New Mexico, which are prevalent throughout, they always have feast days for different reasons, right? Sometimes they would be to celebrate a certain saint, a specific saint, and of course, it's worth noting that most of these tribes have now been indoctrinated heavily with the Catholic religion, so certainly they're going to base a lot of their celebrations now on Catholic beliefs and saints. But they also had a lot of feast days for the dead, and so when we would go, there would be several times I remember as a kid we would go during these feast days. And it entailed essentially all day going from one house to another, being invited to several of the houses that are on the reservation, and eating, sitting down and eating. Essentially, would be one family after another sitting down to be hosted and then eating. And then at the end of it, of course, there would be a big dance, big powwow, with gifts that were handed out. Sometimes even animals were handed out as gifts. It was awesome, and as a kid seeing that and being exposed to that, not understanding why, not really, but I mean, but later on I would learn, what these days meant.
And how long did you attend these? Was it a very long time?
Well, I mean, it was almost every year, I would say, up until a teenager. Almost every year we would at least attend one feast day on one of the pueblos there. And we were surrounded by at least 4 or 5 pueblos. So my grandfather, he was really good friends with a lot of the natives on several of these pueblos, and so he always had a connection, so to speak. But you didn't even need to have that to attend these feast days. They were always open. They were when the day came, everyone was invited. It was awesome. I mean, you just don't.
And they open up their homes and.
They open up their homes. Yeah, they'll. I know that they have certain restrictions about what taking pictures, taking video, certainly out of respect for them.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, for them to open up their homes, strangers, right, to sit down, for them to host you, to feed you, and then you can go on to the next home after that once you were done, if you wanted to be hosted again, said again. It was really their way of showing thanks, for the blessings that God has bestowed, and also to celebrate something more specific, like the Day of the Dead. It was called something different. I can't remember what it was, but
same idea in a sense.
Same idea.
Little different,
exactly.
But same idea. And I mean, and the Mexican people are natives. They're just Native Americans.
Absolutely.
Or natives generally, but yes, Native Americans too. I mean, they had pueblos in Mexico and all over, and the Spaniards were the ones that came in and raised absolute hell. So,
yep.
I mean, a lot
as they did for so many freaking years. Unbelievable what they did.
Oh, absolutely. And the one thing I actually attended a couple of the cemetery Day of the Dead celebrations, where you go and you actually eat. You have a picnic. I did attend a couple of those with a friend's family, and another lady I worked with. She invited me. I was like, hell yeah, I'm up for that, dude. And she's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine with it, because I'm not fearful of death.
Right.
In Mexican culture, they embrace this very much, very differently. In white culture, I would say they don't embrace it at all. There's a fear of death. There's a fear of growing old. There's a fear of the unknown in their minds, because they don't have spiritual roots and cultural roots, in my opinion, that they should, and especially in the United States. I'll go for that. In the United States specifically, an American, let's say a regular white American, it's a little more complicated. There's not a whole lot of culture unless you had, very dedicated grandparents who, handed down their traditions, and you grew up with that tradition, but you lose a lot of that by each generation if you don't have it,
Absolutely.
So when you would go to the cemeteries, we had a dinner, there was music, there was dancing, there was a celebration, they lit candles, there were gifts brought for their deceased loved ones. They took for throughout the year, of course, they would care for the graves of their family members, but this specific holiday, the whole grave was usually decorated beautifully, and it'd go into the night, and they would leave the cemeteries open so people could come in throughout the day, and show their respects to their family members, and it's beautiful. I think that is
absolutely awesome. I honestly, I've never been a part of that. And I would love to be. I mean, I would love to actually do something like that now. I've heard of this. I've heard of these kinds of celebrations. I mean, obviously, with the with the way that the Mexicans, they themselves, do celebrate by having a shrine for someone, right? By making that loved one who has passed their favorite dish,
Yes.
or bringing them their favorite candy or whatever it might
Flowers.
be. Just the time and the love that you put into that for that is obviously that's what they believe is going to keep that connection to that person going. Beautiful. It's a beautiful idea. And I love that. And it is funny because I do wonder why we didn't celebrate it. And I guess I do realize now it was because it wasn't really related to Catholicism
Not really.
so much as
Not the
the
American.
culture.
Right.
Correct.
Because in now keep in mind in Mexico City, it's huge. And the Catholic Church, they're heavily involved in it. And, but yes, traditional, as you come into the United States, I think those things ward off. And it also depends, too. I mean, your grandparents' background and things, were they from, did they grow up in Mexico or did they, come over at a young age?
True.
And were those things handed off? And because they were in a new place and they didn't really have the family graves that they would necessarily in Mexico, where people have stayed in Mexico City almost their entire lives, or they're at least within distance to go to those family graves. I wonder if that had been more made available to them, if they would have done that in that case, if they had those family grave sites available. But I really enjoyed it. I love the idea of it. And now the white culture, once again, referencing it again, there's a lot of fear of death. And they find that kind of stuff morbid,
Right.
And they talk badly about it. And it's bullshit. A lot of it's fear. When people fear
Without a
things, or if they want to say, well, that doesn't make any logical sense. Well, logic and spirituality do not go together. Humans are limited little monkeys, aren't we? We don't. Honestly, we really are.
So true. And we do it so much to ourselves, right? So many of these cultures really they instill these limits on themselves, and like you said, it all goes back to fear. It all goes back to never wanting to appear, on the same level as if everyone else was, just a dumb little monkey, and we cannot associate with that. And they like to disguise their fear as much as possible with what they call logic, right? Well, that's just not logical. It just doesn't make sense. Science has never proven that. And that's what they always fall back on, and at the end of the day, you mentioned this earlier, but when they're on their deathbed, all of a sudden that does go by the wayside in most instances, doesn't it? Especially, anyone who calls themselves an atheist. Suddenly you're not an atheist for even just a quick minute.
Yes. Well, it's true.
They need, yeah.
I mean, I think what's sad is that, for every culture has its Achilles heel. Every culture has its, urban legends and things like that. I mean, that they believe in. And, that's fine. Like, my grandfather and my grandmother were superstitious, but it was more limited to their culture. They were not... my grandmother was born in the United States. My grandfather was a brand new immigrant. So he came from Czech, Hungary, that area. And his family had very Catholic beliefs. And it was more or less everything was based in Catholicism. So his religious rites or rituals were specific to Catholicism. Whereas my grandmother, she had a whole different set on her, different brain, very classic feminist mentality, but very aware, of the world. She wasn't ignorant about it, and she didn't pretend that there wasn't prejudice. She didn't pretend that people were mistreated. Okay, she was very well grounded.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean? So when it came to religion, it wasn't a big discussion in our household. It really wasn't. That was one thing. It was just the way it was. You went to church, or you didn't. But I most of the time was forced in some way to go. And I didn't really care for it because it didn't seem like a lifestyle. It didn't seem like an actual ritual that was beneficial. In order for a ritual to have meaning, you have to have personal investment. And
right.
I think that's what you see in Hispanic cultures is a personal investment in their belief systems. So if it's not the lighting the candles every day, it's the prayer, it's the rosaries, or it's, ensuring that special foods are made for special holidays and acknowledging your ancestry. And I think that the reason why that's so embedded, not just in Hispanic culture, you see it in the Chinese culture, Asian cultures in general. They all carry very similar traits about hungry ghosts, as an example, the ancestors
True.
and things like that, where you give them basically, tidings of food or offerings of food and different things that that particular spirit or entity or ancestors would be connected to. That's something that that has helped, I believed, that has helped many religions carry on the necessary tools to keep their families connected and understanding and respective of where they've come from to where they are now. And white culture doesn't do that, and I think that's why we have the problems we do in American society, is that we really don't know who the hell we are. And so you have many people with different, their heads are just kind of spinning all the time. Like, they really don't know who they are, unfortunately.
Wow, that's actually pretty eye-opening. I mean, but it's true. It makes a lot of sense. But I guess it's when you think about it, it's been this way for so long, right? Just because of the path, in history that that most white culture has come from. And I think, and I'm even going to say this, it's probably more American white culture, right? We are the most lost. That culture is the most lost of them all, because they're not native here.
Right.
They all came from somewhere else, and most of the time they don't even know where, to be exact.
And
So
they
you're
don't,
right.
and they don't really care about their history either.
Right.
The majority of people, like, I've been lucky. I've been associating with people who do care. That maybe they do genealogy, right, or maybe they really are seeking that understanding of who they are, where they came from, the stories in their families. But it is a very unique American issue, because if you go to other countries, people have most of the time they've been in the culture of which they came. This entire country is nothing but immigrants.
Absolutely.
And we're a relatively young country. So, we're still developing who we are. A Native American family has a very great sense, as an example, a very deep embedded sense of who they are and where they came from, because look at their culture.
Correct.
Right? So when you see the Mexican culture and how much there's family orientation and rejection of certain things that are, quote, modern, it's not because they're prejudiced, it's because they're carrying on their family traditions.
Right. There is a pride there.
Absolutely.
There's a pride there that you don't find in every culture, that is for sure. Especially, I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead.
I was going to say, I think Americans, in general, just, the only pride that they really find, that they can kind of cling to is the nationalism, right? We are America, land of the free, home of the brave, like, oh, well, this is our culture now. So it's easy to cling just to that, but it doesn't have actually anything really to do with, like the origins of a people, of a culture. That's different completely. But yeah, if you talk to, obviously, close to the border here, down here in South Texas, you're going to hear at every corner, you're gonna hear a remark about how proud someone is, about their Mexican heritage or their Mexican culture, or even of the country of Mexico, just because it has to be thrown out there. But
Yeah.
But that's very different, and than the pride that you hear coming from American, white American culture.
And it's interesting because they all intertwine, in the belief systems that each culture carries. And I've heard variations of different things that people's families believe in, and those things are carried on from their grandparents if they were, if they had a relationship with them. Keep in mind, because now in American culture, that's not the same. I know a lot of people that never even knew their grandparents. I mean, that blows my mind, because I was
Right.
very close to my grandparents, and you were as well.
Same here.
So, I mean, to think that they weren't close to their grandparents, didn't have a relationship with them at all, blows my mind. But it's also scary because the purpose of grandparents, in not even a perfect scenario, in general, how it used to be, was that their job was to kind of guide you and to be the other set of parents that kind of come in and they have, more of an at ease ear, but they're still going to scold you. They're still going to, keep your ass in line, but they're
Right.
going to direct you where you need to go a little bit and also give you insight based on experience because they have lived. And without that checks and balances, you end up with just a lot of lost people. So I think
Right.
that's what you're seeing. That's why we have most of the SJWs that I've seen. At least let's say the really gung-ho ones, as an example, are very lost. They don't have an identity, they
You can hear it. You can feel it. Like you can just tell that they really are lost.
Yeah.
And that, and you're absolutely right. I think it goes back to that loss in family. I mean, they just even if they may have their grandparents still alive, right? Even if they have everyone, their parents and grandparents alive. I know a lot of people right now that have their great grandparents that are still alive.
that blows my mind. Yeah, it blows my mind.
Right, right. I mean, honestly, I can't remember. I had to have been 5 when my great grandmother passed away, because that just seems like, that seems more common. But yeah, a lot of kids now, honestly, they really, I'll call them kids. They have no connection like that. As a matter of fact, they kind of look at them like they're just old and a burden. They're just waiting to die. Like
And that's the other very good topic to talk about right there is how is the elderly treated in Hispanic
There you
culture
go.
versus white culture. And you will see a very interesting I mean, I really respect the fact that they care for their aging family members because in white culture, I would say I had read an article and I've been searching for it ever since, of course, because I forgot to save it. But but there was an article talking about that, during the baby boomer 1980s phase, okay, of the boomers, that nursing homes tripled in the amount of nursing homes that were being used and utilized and being built because more and more boomers were putting their parents into nursing homes or adult living centers.
right.
And those nursing homes were making bank, and
Yeah.
and you look at it and you're like, holy shit. But then you start to see it in the children where they don't even, like the grandkids, they don't even know their grandparents. And soon, and as time went on, from the 80s into 90s into the 2000s, that separation of relationship has grown significantly. I know more and more people that never even knew their grandparents. If they did, it was very like once a year, maybe at a family function or, whatever the hell. Very limited access to their own grandparents, and nobody lived near each other. There's always a reason why they weren't close. I mean, whether that was health reasons or it was distance. But to me, that kind of blows my mind because it's absolutely necessary to have the elders in your family around, even if they're a pain in the ass, okay?
Yep.
That was, I mean, in Mexican culture, I worked in hospice. I've been in a couple of those homes. And I will tell you this, the only reason I was there was to help with additional stuff. I was not there to sit with the patient.
Right.
In that case, I was there more or less just to help the household, meaning I'll run this errand for you or I'll clean this room. You go, spend time with your mother or your father and I'll take care of this.
Right.
And everyone was always very kind and they always tried to downplay hospice. And also, you don't show your badge. So I would have to hide badges so they wouldn't see them because the elderly, person in question who was not doing well would lose their shit seeing a hospice member there. So I was just that friend that came over to help, wink, wink, and
Right.
because
Right.
that's how they felt. They felt that like hospice is the end times, the angel of death, basically, right?
Right.
It's-
Definitely a strong sense of pride there
Absolutely.
for them. That is, that they didn't need to be reminded of that. They already knew. So, you're right. I could see how that would be perceived.
Oh yeah.
Um,
And that evil, like in a mind, they're like, oh, you're asking for it by being here. Like as if
right.
my presence is going to bring the angel of death himself. But I understand. So I never like got pissed or upset. No. I know better. Don't worry. This isn't about me. And that's the one thing I believe in with that is I have no problem being humble around that shit. Because I knew
Right.
what my grandparents were like when they got into their elderly age. I was there with them when they left this world. I saw the processes of growing old, losing their friends, all those things that come with death. And so I was like, no, I understand. And I was overwhelmed and honestly, without sounding cheesy, a little emotional seeing how well taken and loved these family members were by the aging elderly person, and how their children, their nieces, their nephews, their cousins, their grandkids, everybody came together and was, there was always at least 2 or 3 people available.
Right.
And there was always a handful. This person was never left alone. And American culture is the exact opposite of that. There's no respect for the elderly. They're made fun of. They're belittled. They're called every name in the book. And a lot of that comes from the boomers. And now the boomers are aging. I would say the younger ones especially are having a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
And they are starting to recognize the maltreatment that they issued their own parents in some occasions. They're now receiving it. Not all boomers did that. There was a lot that did caregive for their own parents, but it was done with spitefulness, not feeling. There are very few of them that did it out of love. Let's say that, and out of respect or honor, which is very different. It is an honor to take care of someone when they're elderly, especially if you love them, even if they're dealing with Alzheimer's or they're dealing with some, ALS, right?
Right.
You care for that family member, and you love them, even if it's hard, and you will have your moments where you're like, I can't deal with this today. Caregiver fatigue is very common, but the difference is, though, is that after everything is said and done, there is a great relief knowing that you were there for what you could be there for.
Sure, I can imagine. Absolutely.
And I don't think that there's an emotional understanding of the need to be there. And so when you have all of these, belief systems, it's a part of that family unit. It's a part of how, family dynamics work.
Right. It's, it makes me sad to think about it because I've seen it. It's almost as if, yeah, she's my grandma, he's my grandfather, but you know what? I mean, what use do I have for them, right? Now it's about, what can I get when they're gone? They need to have that. It's like it's embedded in them to look for what's tangible, what they can be offered tangibly. So that connection just isn't there. They don't value the relationships as much anymore. And you're seeing this also, toward their own parents, not even just their grandparents. That connection is not the same there for a lot of white families between kids and their own parents. It's again, it just goes back to, you know what? I'm above this. I don't need to worry about it. It doesn't affect me. If I can't get anything out of it, then it's not really something that I'm going to invest time in.
Right.
And it just feels like, how long has this been going on?
Right.
I mean,
it's shocking in a lot of ways. Just that, that very self-serving ego that comes into it. And now that people are aging, they're starting to experience all the things that their elderly parents were experiencing. It's like you can actually feel the death rattles every time something happens now. And I'm not saying that this is everyone in the white community at all, but I am saying it's a good majority. And I am saying that I recognized it when it was going on, when I was around this shit, watching my grandparents go through what they were going through and seeing how the dynamic was in my own family about how they were being treated. And I was the only one that was dedicated. And that's messed up, but that's the truth. And the reason I was dedicated was because I respected, just like you do too as well with grandparents, we respect what they did for us as children and as young adults. or young people in general, because those were life lessons. Those were things that we look back on now and go, ah, damn, I wish they were here.
Right, right. And I mean, I think back and I wonder where in the hell would I be if without them?
Hmm.
Where would I be right now?
Right.
Um, I cannot imagine living my entire childhood with my parents alone. God forbid. Uh, I mean, so you're right. I mean, that connection was always there. Um, and I think nowadays, one thing you're seeing in parenting, especially within the white culture, is like that they want to be a friend more than a parent.
Hmm.
And I think those kids also expect that of their grandparents. So if you're not going to act like my friend, like I don't need another parent, or I don't need someone
Telling me what to
to
do. Hmm.
guide me exactly. It's really bizarre, right? That it's kind of changed that. But
Hmm.
not saying that you won't get that in the Mexican culture,
Oh
because yeah,
yeah.
you're always going to have your families that are a little messed up. Yep, know that.
Hmm.
But there's definitely more of a sense of knowing who the matriarch or the patriarch is,
Right.
in the family. Most of the time, it is going to be grandpa and grandma, um, and they're treated that way, right? That respect is there. Um, so it's just it's bizarre to walk into one household that has that, and then into another one, which I've done as a kid, and not seen that, not felt that same connection, and the way that even just the way that they were spoken to
Hmm.
was different, and of course, you're exposed to that, so you wonder, is this how it always is? Is
Right.
this just are we just a weird family then, or is this
Right.
the norm? What's going on here? But
Well, it's a very surreal experience when you go into someone else's house. I remember when we had Cuban neighbors, and I used to be like that kid. I was a neighborhood kid always at their house. They always fed me. I was treated like I was a part of the family. I was never, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it was
absolutely.
wonderful. They opened their house up all the time. They always had great parties. They always had, it was very much like an extended family. So I was like that haunting presence, I was always over there, dude, because I knew mom was going to cook for me. And I was like, hell yeah. Um, but they really cared about one another, and they cared about those that they felt were good, good hearted.
Right.
And and when I went to the West Coast, from the East Coast, this is a big jump now. That was there again, and I was like, it was even more colorful,
Hmm.
and more rich with culture. And I was like, the food was fantastic. The people were always kind to me. I never got any shit. There was no racist crap. It was fantastic. I was like, this is
Right.
awesome. And then I went to Mexico. I had a fantastic time just eating alone. But you know but the parties were fun. Everybody was, they teased you, like very similar to how my grandfather was very old school blue collar man, and all the men were very similar to that, a little bit of the machismo bullshit, but that's fine. That's men, that's fine. But there was always this openness of home and family. And if I had my child with me, he was welcome too. There was never any questions, or if I didn't know Spanish, there was no bullshit given to me. They were just very welcoming,
Right.
and I was
Right. Right.
overwhelmed by that. I was
Maybe they'd haze you a little bit,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah, a little
something
hazy, but
playful, right? Yeah,
nothing,
they're
nothing.
good at that.
Yeah, oh yeah, they give me shit, and I'd be like, I don't care, chimichanga me, man. Like Pablo, give me another chimmy. I don't give
Oh
a
God.
damn. Feed me, you know. And that was it. And they had the best dancing, they had the best parties. It was always about family, and everyone gave each other shit. And I'm like, this is fantastic. And this was a big, like, it was not. It was a welcomed, nice culture shock because I had grown up with it, a version of it. The Cuban culture is very different, but it's still very family orientated, very open door, very loving. A lot of great parties, lots of dancing and food, and very positive memories from all of that. But with white culture, it's very different. It's very ritualistic. Depending on, once again, grandparents and so on, their backgrounds, you're going to get variances. And also, immigrants that came to the United States early on had a lot of shame with their culture and beliefs. So
Right. True.
they really did subdue a lot of their, I mean, not everything, but definitely assimilated to this westernized, I don't know, colonialistic type of, keep it quiet, don't make a scene or else you might lose a job or you may not get hired somewhere or you might get bullied in school. So there was a lot of assimilation being pushed on immigrants. So I think that's also why I didn't have it, I didn't see the colorful parts of their culture as much because of that, persecution or
Yeah.
needing to fit in and not stick out.
Absolutely.
In the Hispanic culture is like, fuck you guys, we're here to party. And that's pretty much what it was. They're like, we're about our family, we don't give a shit, And it was very much a pride, not just in, where their country of origin was, whatever that be, or, state or whatever. It was just about their history, their family, their heritage, a lot of pride. And I with all the shit that everyone gives everybody, about where they come from or what they do. There's a lot of cultural ignorances that go into line with that. I've seen both the bad and the ugly of everything, and that includes Hispanic culture as well. But I'm aware of it, and as long as I'm aware of it, I'll be okay. But you can't go into something expecting it to fit into our American bubble of being, with helicopter parents and shitty upbringings of communication. I agree with your point earlier. We have a lot of helicopter parents, and it's just discouraging. These kids deserve better.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's really gotten really out of control, honestly, when it comes to that. And just knowing, just the basic idea of what parenting is supposed to be about, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of what a lot of parents are doing now are well, we're just going to make sure that that you're smart enough to at least get into, some of the better schools. It's more about we're just going to give you what you need. We're going to teach you what you need, or at least provide the resources for what you need. But we're not going to teach you what you shouldn't do, right?
Right.
We're not going to teach you. It's not about teaching lessons anymore. That's
right.
not what parenting is. It's just lost, and you can see that in the kids. You can tell, that the parenting that they're getting is usually going to be coming from somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they don't listen most of the time to anybody. The respect level there, toward adults in general, is not what it used to be when we were kids.
Or even just general etiquette.
Right. Simple manners, right? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So it's, so you're seeing that. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be perfect in the Mexican culture or any other culture, but the fact that there is still a foundation there, still a pride there, because of the culture, still at least allows these kids to kind of be raised with, some of these, basic, just, I don't even know what you want to call it, but with some morals, with a sense of morals, right? Like a moral compass, I guess. You don't see that in a lot of white families now, white kids. It's different. You can just see it. So
yeah, I agree. They're just, it's because of, I think when you start to lose your history a little bit, which is obviously related to your beliefs and culture and how you're raised, when you start to lose those things because generations pass away and these, quote, newer and more intellectual generations take over, you start to lose those moral compasses. And there was a very interesting article I saw posted, and it was about these millennials that were living at a nunnery. It's part of a program they're doing so they can understand what it's like as a female nun, as an example, in the Catholic Church. Why would they be a nun? Well, most nuns have more independence. That's why they did it. Aside from being under the crux of the church, they had a lot more independence. If they didn't want to marry, they were very strong ladies who were like, I just don't want to marry and I want to dedicate myself to my beliefs. And so they're putting millennials with them, and the nuns were saying, they wanted to understand our rituals. Well, what about your vows? Is those the rules for living? They're asking nuns what the rules for living are. And I blew my mind. I was like, are you serious? Because they abstain from sex, yes, but they're also not,
Right.
they believe in living in some they're humble. They don't
Right.
believe in materialism. They keep things simple. And they also, but the background of that is it's the spiritual roots that keep them that way. It's having a faith. And, excuse me, it's not so much the faith and let's throw out the Catholic Church for a second in this argument. It's about having a faith in themselves and something bigger than themselves, and having faith that and the confidence to follow through on those things. And guess what? You are going to fail, and that's okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big lesson. Millennials have a fear of failure. And they find excuses such as mental health days when in all actuality they just needed to take a step back and breathe and go, okay, let's go back to bat. Persevere through it. And they haven't been taught perseverance. I'm not saying this is applicable to all millennials. I would say this applies to anyone, younger generations below boomers in general. The perseverance that's required in life is something that's been lacking, lack of better words,
Right.
And I found that interesting. They were just asking about rituals of like just to learn how to live and how to interact and having faith in themselves. Because
Wow.
and it blew my mind because I was like,
Yeah.
where are the fucking parents, man? Like
Exactly.
your kids are at a nunnery. Click, tiki talk crazies. Your kids are at a nunnery asking for advice about how to live, how to live humbly, like a guidebook, like guidance. The answer to these things is very simple. You look within. You question things. You don't go along with the group think on anything. And when it comes to faith, like I'm willing to give everything a shot. Now, aside from being a psycho or doing something violent or against a group, nothing crazy like that. But I'm always up to have adventures.
Yeah, I'm up for human sacrifice.
Yeah, you're like cannibalism's you've been
Who's
fucking
first?
solved. You're like world hunger, cannibalism, figured it out. But it's just having a moral compass. It's understanding right from wrong, learning how to be humble, and also having confidence. There's pieces of information, I collected over the years, and if I don't understand it, I will study the hell out of it, which we've talked about. And you as well. If you find something you're interested in, you will research it and then think about it and really reflect on it. Not just go, okay, well, this guy says it's A, B, and C. No. You look for the guy at the end of the line that's going, no, guys, it's not A, B, and C. It's, X, Y, and Z. You want to look at both angles on every topic and everything in life. And also just, I'm glad that they're talking to these nuns, but they're missing the point.
Right.
Spirituality is not religion. I've argued with different, to be completely honest, more males, that are religious. And would I be acting the same if I were a male, a part of a religion? That's what I've questioned. Would I be arguing the same way I am now if I were a male? And the answer would be yes, I would, because of how I think. But then again, if I were a male brought up as a male, would I be able to distinguish the two? Probably not.
Probably not. No, you're right.
I would probably think the same way and be like, yes, this is the way of life. This is the best way, blah, 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 blah. But the truth is, you cannot have people love throwing up the word patriarchy like it's the demon itself. You cannot have a patriarchy without the matriarchy. Okay? And there's an alpha of both genders. That's just tribalistic thinking. How we survive doesn't go away. We are all still, crazy monkeys running around this planet, okay, who still can't figure out how to wipe our own asses and figure out how to maintain our mental health without having a meltdown.
So true.
And that's how I look at it, right? So when it comes to belief systems, whether that be white or Hispanic, everyone has variations. They find themselves looking at how they were brought up, those tools that their grandparents or parents gave to them, and then they look around themselves and start to, I think it's completely healthy to investigate faith in any form. And if somebody says, well, I'm an atheist and all of you guys can go fucking die, which I've heard, that individual has a lot more problems than than anything I could ever say to them to rebuttal it. And I wouldn't fight with someone that's an angry atheist. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Because what am I arguing with?
Well, exactly.
I don't know.
Where would it get you?
Yeah.
Right. You're.
I'm giving a big shrug. I don't know. But
And yeah, and I've argued with one. I lived with one. And he was sure to remind me how low on the totem pole I was, as a religious / spiritual person during that time. But if I were to ever question him, or debate him in any way, he wasn't going to have it. He'd be offended by it. So.
Absolutely. But but if you go back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the conversation, it's that intellectualism of being superior.
There you go.
And that is a construct of a westernized, primarily white society that started that shit. And if it's not here, you're looking at the UK. Or you're looking at France.
Right.
And the intellectuals are the first to die. Based on history, I'm just saying. So you might want to consider, who you're aligning yourself with and start thinking outside of the box. Now, if somebody wants to be an atheist, I think that's fine. You have the freedom to do it, and I'd love to have that conversation. But I'm not going to sit here and name call. I'm not going to get into, well, this is bullshit because there's no evidence of. Okay. But that's what the definition of faith is not having evidences at times.
Absolutely.
So, that's an endless, bottomed out argument, in my opinion, because this person's claiming you need evidence. Faith is not evidence based. Holy shit, right?
Right.
What do you do with that?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the atheists, who also believe in science, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, keep in mind, when you say you believe in science, that right there is a faith, is it not? That's a belief.
Yes, it is.
And you're putting your faith in something that we, in a system essentially that we've created to explain things better, to have answers for everything, which obviously we do not. But they do have faith that science will eventually be able to answer those questions, whatever they may be. If you were to try to convince them of that, they wouldn't see that. I'm just like, how is that any different, people? Let's bring it down a notch here.
Oh, absolutely.
Same idea. So
I think it's it's science. Yes, you have proof, but a lot of it, I would say 80% of it right now, is still on hypothesis. Because you know how many times that they'll say, we found an answer, and then fast forward 5 years, they're like, shit, well, half of that's true. Or we found a little bit of truth, but we can only we don't really know what a black hole does.
Correct.
We don't really know.
It's still a theory. There's so many things within science that, maybe within the rules of proving something, we have something, some kind of evidence, right?
Right.
But it's still within our own rules. It's still not absolute truth. We're still limited, science, and what I wish people would understand is that science is nothing more than a tool to help us explain things just for our own knowledge. Our brain still cannot really possibly imagine what absolute truth is when it comes to the universe and life around us. It's just nothing more than a vehicle for us to try to explain things a little bit better. That's all it is.
Yeah.
People get lost in that. They don't. They think that science is just there to answer every question, and it's not. It's not.
Right.
But anyway, sorry, I know we went off on a tangent.
No, it's true though. When you look at the crossroads of science and religion, they'll argue against each other and say, oh, well, you're superstition based and we're not. And, science kind of points the finger at religion and say, you're the reason why things suck. And then religion will point the finger at science and goes, well, you're just as stupid as we are, or, it goes back and forth. But how I look at it too is they're both different. I agree with what you said. They're both forms of faith and different bases. Looking
Absolutely.
at it, looking through things in a different compass. I look at it like this, you look at it like that. You could argue all day long about, religion as a whole is a pain in the ass. There are beautiful, beautiful things to it, and then there's the nastiest things on this planet that have come out of religion.
Absolutely.
But make no mistake, I believe in a greater, what do you call it? I believe in a greater thing than, oh, well, I don't believe, as an example, do I believe that there's a physical devil, right? No, I don't. I believe that it's a construct not only of religion, but of faith-based belief, and also there's a yin and a yang. So what we dumb down, once again, us crazy monkeys running around this planet, okay, what we've dumbed down the devil to could quite honestly be the required yin and yang.
Right.
Of how the universe, with every positive in the universe, there's a negative, right? And that's in different facets. I mean, we don't know what a black hole does, but who's to say what's on the other side? There, we could. It's like the Men in Black ending. We're like,
Right.
we're like, it was the one with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, where it was like this little tiny universe.
Yep.
It's
nothing but a
speck.
a little marble, right?
Yeah, and it's a kind of a joke, but it's true. We really don't know. Now,
Exactly.
like I'm putting up a thing right now. It says that science is fact and religion is superstition. And is that true? Yes and no. Facts are debatable because we don't have facts. I mean, it's based on. Well, do we have some facts? Absolutely. Do we have all of do we have the absolute truth in science? No, we don't.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
that's kind of an arguable statement. Now, is religion superstition? A good portion of it is, I would say. It goes back to beliefs in paranormal. It goes back to beliefs in urban legends. But it's back to, if you throw religion out the window, what matters is the faith and spirituality. And, I found God long before I found religion. Okay, and that's a
Right.
fact for me as an individual. Do I think that science is the end-all? Hell no. As somebody who if you go to your medical doctor, I don't know how many stories we've heard of this, you've gone to your medical doctor and they tell you, oh, well, we think we can kill this cancer, or we think that we know what illness you have. And then you go back a week later and they're like, actually, we don't have a clue.
Right.
This is an anomaly.
Happens every day, right?
Exactly.
Happens every day.
Because they're practicing medicine. They are not, they might have some facts, but they don't have the truth, because if they had the truth, there wouldn't be cancer to begin with. Okay? So, there wouldn't be cancer anymore. It'd be curable. The point is that we're still figuring things out. Our little monkey brains be running around this planet, still not sure what the hell we're doing. Drunk driving. We're fucking drunk drivers of the universe. Humans are drunk drivers.
Drunk monkeys, you think?
Absolutely. So, I mean, so when you get into that facet of argument, then it's like, oh God, you got your sciences, and atheists will lean on science a lot, but that's a cult system as well. Just like atheism has become its own religion in a sense. I was talking to a former atheist. He's agnostic now. He's just like, I don't know what the fuck's going on. Who the hell knows? I don't want to be an atheist, because they've become their own religion. Where it's,
right?
Yeah, and he's like, it's cultist. It's very cultist behavior. So he goes, it's hard. To me, he goes, what atheism has become is this catch-all for just being angry. And he goes, and that's not what he believes. He just didn't want to believe in any of it. But in retrospect, after he and I spoke for a while, he goes, really what it is he goes, I don't really understand myself. And I recognize that.
See, and there's some honesty right there that you're not going to hear.
Absolutely.
From most people, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can respect that. There's nothing wrong with saying I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody, now we live in this world where it's not okay to not know. You always have to know. Oh, we have the internet. How do you not know the answer to something? You know what? Sometimes there are no answers.
Right.
Not right now.
All you can do is kind of argue it. That's it. In your brain, you just go back and forth, going, well,
Right.
So yeah, so here's a question. Before we wrap this thing up here, I'm sure we were going to see your profile pic and be like, okay, what the hell? You. So what's up with the Hail Sagan?
Carl Sagan's my hero, man. Here's the thing. Carl Sagan he's really the first astronomer that I ever learned about. As a kid, and especially as a teenager. And the dude just had a way with words. I mean, if you've watched his Cosmos series and you listen to that dude talk, and if you read his books and read the way that he wrote, I mean, he spoke the way that, or he wrote the way that he spoke. The guy was poetic. Like when it came to explaining just the little nuances about our universe, our planet, cosmos in general, he knew how to connect with people. He knew how to say the things that would make people wonder about it, be interested in, in the field in general. And he's the first one that opened my eyes to astronomy. And ever since then, of course, I've loved it. And you know what? Come on. Sagan, Satan, I love metal. Come on. Yes, the connection is there. So
Yeah, it's and a lot of it is too because he got demonized a lot.
oh yeah.
Because he was agnostic. He wasn't an atheist.
Right.
He had a deep spirituality to him, and he believed in spirituality. He definitely did. He's like, how can you look at this? How can you look in the universe and not question that?
He wasn't afraid to say that. I mean, as much as he was a scientist, yes, he saw things through the goggles of science. We'll say it that way, right? But he, the reason why he loved it so much was because there was a spiritual connection to the cosmos that he felt that most people don't. And yeah, and even though yes, did he believe in a god? He would have said no, right? He would have said he was atheist in that regard, but he really wasn't. He was absolutely very agnostic. He just believed in, seeking more truth, and not everyone is brave enough to want to do that.
Right.
So, yeah, he just had a way of infecting you with this, this thirst for knowledge about the cosmos in general, and that is, to me, where the real connection comes from, right?
Right.
I'm a spiritual person. I'm not, a religious person, even though I grew up that way. But when I think of spirituality and I think of God, I think about the universe as a whole and how understanding that will help you understand God better. And I think that's what Sagan, that's what Carl was, without ever wanting to use the word God. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you for spending some time with me today and having a chitty chat
Of
about all
course.
this.
Well, it was fun, Ed. I really appreciate you inviting me once again.
Oh yeah, and in the future too, we'll probably have round tables and stuff where we start getting a little bit more in depth on certain aspects. But
That'd be great. That'd be fun.
oh yeah, I thought it would be really cool because I have a couple other people that wanted to do round tables. I'm trying to get one done with Willie and another guest on hopefully this weekend. We'll see, and that'll probably be more of a live stream. This will be an episode that is obviously being recorded to either I'll probably upload it probably in the early morning hours. But anyway, I do appreciate you spending time with me tonight, and we'll have to get together and have more conversations because there's so many different aspects. But I thought this was an interesting topic because there are cultural differences, and we don't talk about it. It's just kind of like demonizing white people in general. That is not the purpose of the conversation.
Right.
It's to help our culture grow. Right now, we are screwed, and it's just the behavior. And we need to take lessons from other cultures and also take a look at our history and go, we can't keep throwing out our identity. Is screwing over future generations. And just because something seems off the wall, what happened to having an open mind? Isn't that okay?
Right.
Have an open mind. And because I enjoy all of this stuff immensely because you can connect the dots and then you can connect that faith system. And do I think that these things exist? Well, yeah, on some level, absolutely. I don't know in some instances because I haven't had those experiences, but by talking to people who have had those experiences within, especially in the Mexican culture, significantly I believe them based on their level of fear or level of just optimism or surprise or shock. When you talk to anybody who's had an experience with something that they can't explain or would be labeled paranormal, which is abnormal, anything, you can question what normal is any day, but
Yeah.
anything that's objectively different, you can always take something from that and listen, because you don't know what you're missing. So I really appreciate you
Right.
coming on and talking about a little bit about your grandparents and just how your household ran. And I thought the whole thing was very interesting, because you're not the first person that's told me stories about this, or at least I've seen things too.
It's craziness, isn't it, though?
It
It's
is,
really, it's at the end of the day, it's like, what?
and
Like,
it's
where
deeply
did it start?
right.
How did it come to this?
Right, and a lot of it is just going, because I would like to do a stream talking about the Mexican witches. They actually have a very large city there in Mexico.
Right.
They're prevalent in, but also just the impact that witches have in Mexican culture is very interesting. I'm talking more of the natural earthbound witches that are out of Mexico versus the Wiccan, pagan, Americanized, I would say, westernized culture
Right.
of witches, which is completely different. Just based on not just there's similar characteristics, but there's culturally big differences, and that's what builds up those characters. But anyway,
Whatever, they all wear hats. They all wear and ride brooms. Okay.
that's terrible. Oh God, you're gonna get struck down with something you watch. You're gonna
It's about time. It's about time.
Oh God. Well, anyway, I wanted to thank my guest, Mr. Sagan, for coming on tonight. And if you are watching this stream, I really appreciate you kind of coming in and checking out everything. And check me out on Twitter. You hear on my channel as Mad Squirrel, but on Twitter I'm under SGT Mad Squirrel. Give me a follow, and we'll chitty chat. And if you ever want to come on, just send me a DM on there, and we can sit down and have a little mini talk, or even have you on a round table. So thanks again, Carl. I really appreciate having you on.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
You too.